The following program is intended for mature audiences.
Rudy's revelation.
I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
I'm an American. I have rights.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. It is April 10th, Thursday. So Trump pulls back from the onslaught of tariffs with allies and enemies alike, except for China. So it turns out I was right. It's all about China. Wasn't about it is about the other countries, but certainly not as much. He's planning on getting or cutting the umbilical cord to the communists who are actually feeding off of us. Also, we have a budget bill in question. Will the House cave to more spending? Or will there be reconciliation? All right, let's get into the headlines. We've got over 40 headlines in the head count. So let's get started. We're going to start out with One America News. Wall Street posts biggest single day gain since 2008 following Trump's surprise tariff reversal. The New York Times, stocks jump after Trump's tariff reprieve. Markets in Europe and Asia soared after U.S. president paused punishing tariffs. Gains in mainland China were modest as trade hostilities heat up between Washington and Beijing. It is indeed a trade war. We have been at war, as I said many, many times, with communist China. Well, they're at war with us. It's a fifth generational war. So they are constantly using espionage and infiltration, cyber warfare with cyber stay behind malware, et cetera, ready for something to kick off. They're way more prepared than we are. And plus, they are preparing their tools, their economic tools to wage economic warfare, which has been going on at a subdued level. But we're at war with China, just not a kinetic, war, a military war. All right, I'm just going to show the graph real briefly here from the New York Times. It shows Germany, China, Canada, UK, United States, Japan, all bouncing back. Even China. China seemed to have gone down the least. And so its recovery was the most modest, but recovery still the same. And that really comes on the heels of what the European Union and von der Leyen was planning to do. There were two different channels of communication coming out of Europe. One said, we are going to deal with Trump. We are going to have a diplomatic solution. We are going to negotiate with the United States. And the other was saying we are preparing retaliatory tariffs. So that was the key. The European Union came out with their retaliatory framework, and then everything went sideways at that point. And I'm going to get into the details just a second. But let's go back to the New York Times story. While those countries won't immediately face the additional tariffs the Trump administration had previously threatened, they will still be subject to a lower rate of 10%. Sector-specific tariffs, including 25% levy on cars, a particular sore point for big automakers in Japan, South Korea, and Germany, are still in place. Trump did not walk back tariffs on China, which now exceed 100%. Also, industry-specific tariffs like on aluminum and steel will all stay. So is it a pause? It's a brief pause, and we're going to go into why that happened. The day before yesterday, well, it was yesterday, there was an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal early. Trump blinks on tariffs again. For now, the president pauses on some tariffs amid a bond rout and recession fear. So what are they talking about here? Well, the bond market soured, and that was the indicator Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, and Trump were looking at. That, combined with a weakening dollar, was their trigger point. They didn't want to go into recession, obviously, because they're trying to kickstart the economy. So what it did is it helped them decide, and Scott Bessent was urging Trump to say, hey, we need to give a brief pause here because we have so many countries that want to negotiate. The ones that are at the back of the line are getting nervous because of the deadlines and so forth and so on. So we just put off the deadlines. This morning, the Dow is down. All the markets are down, modestly. It's nothing to worry about. It's another correction as they look at what exactly the statement Bessent and Trump made means. Back to the New York Times, markets soar after Trump backs down on tariffs. The S&P 500 rose 9.5% after President Trump announced he would pause on his reciprocal tariffs for 90 days. But economists warned that American importers were not out of danger. You're not out of danger. This is an evolving thing. What we're doing is looking to protect markets and protect alliances and trading partners. We want to be less. Less forceful on countries that aren't necessarily our enemies. The problem with China is our enemy, ideological enemy, economic trading adversary. Everything about China is adversarial from the POV of the United States and really the West. But European Union is so socialist now, and the merchant class, the corporate class, is still interested in making a world modeled on China. You probably heard this many times. Neo-feudalistic technocracy. The New York Times headline goes on to say, Wall Street gleeful embrace of the policy reversal reflected relief that Mr. Trump would not follow through with most of his plans for the tariffs. That's not true. Which has sent markets into a tailspin and threatened to upend global trade. It will upend global trade because of all the things I talked about and what the corporate class wanted was a slave state to take advantage of low-wage workers, slave labor, before they can get the robots online, which is also coming. While many countries would have their tariffs reduced, Mr. Trump said the relief would not extend to China. Obviously, as I said many times, sure, this was about trade deficits in a broad sense, but it's really about China. We have to stop building our adversary. If anybody really looked at the financial picture and China's rise and all these other things, and that China's behavior towards America and the West, which is threatening, and then we go ahead and have these exclusive and enormous trading arrangements. Wall Street Journal, why Trump blinked on tariffs just hours after they went into effect. Treasury Secretary helped persuade President to take time to negotiate with trading partners and face a pressure from business leaders. It's really the market, and it wasn't even the market because stocks the stock market is not the economy, as it was been pointed out on the Talking Head shows yesterday, many and many a time by conservatives. The stock market is not the economy. Does it affect the economy? Sure. The real bellwether was the bond market and, of course, the dollar, which continued to weaken. Really has to do, I mean, I'm sure they know this, but a lot of it, the dollar weakening has a lot to do with oil prices coming down. But I'm not going to digress too much into that. The Wall Street Journal article says the rout in the dollar assets reversed, at least somewhat, and the rise in the benchmark 10-year Treasury bond yield eased. It would be hard to find better evidence that the markets believe the biggest threat to the world economy is Mr. Trump's tariffs, so they say. I don't really believe that. The problem is with any change, upheaval, the lack of transparency, or as Maria Bartiromo said, the markets need clarity. So, because the markets need to look into the future. That's how you make money in the stock market, is to put your bets down on a sure thing. That's what the stock market is, investing in things that will turn profit, etc. Or from the Wall Street Journal, the Wall Street Journal says the dollar and the bond market's ominous message for Trump. In the turmoil touched off by the trade war, the U.S. is no longer seen as safe. So they say. What we have going on here now is the fact that these were the two indicators they were watching. The U.S. is safe. The dollar will be safe. But like I said, with any financial turmoil, there's going to be an adjustment period. The problem is the investors don't know what's going to happen. So the people that are heavily reliant on China are the ones sweating the most. And most big business has heavily invested in China. And this whole move is to get the production, the manufacturing out of China. Who cares where it goes? You know, some people are like, oh, so it's going to go from China to Vietnam. Big whoop. Yeah, Vietnam is not our adversary. They're communists. They might be an ideological enemy, adversary. But they are in no way, shape, or form like the Chinese, and they actually hate the Chinese. Or from the Wall Street Journal, Trump transforms tariff war into high-stakes showdown with China. The clash locks world's two largest economies in an extraordinary conflict without immediate exits. What we need to understand here, too, is that China was poised to leapfrog the United States within the next year or two. That's why Trump's election and the showdown wasn't inevitable, but was better to be done now before the Chinese did what they were going to do. Because much like the American left, once the Democrats take over a state, they're going to ensure that, you know, they're going to pull the ladder up behind them, figuratively. So that's what China, if China surpassed us, they would never let us regain dominance. That was their strategy. So it's important that we do this now. I don't believe a military conflict is on the horizon, because, as the Wall Street Journal likes to say, it's the two largest economies in the world, but the American economy is much bigger. And we can still use our economic might and our markets and leverage those in a way to put the lid on China, which we should have done a long time ago. I mean, they joined the WTO in the 90s. By the 2000s, it was there to see that they were not going to comply. They were not going to change their ways after being let in to, or given partake in the golden goose of the Western economies. All right, Real Clear Politics. O'Leary, 400% tariffs on China. Xi can only stay supreme leader if the people are employed. PJ Media, here's why Kevin O'Leary wants to quadruple Trump tariffs on China. He goes on to say, not the Europeans, no administration for decades has taken on China. As someone who actually does business there, I've had enough. I speak for millions of Americans who have IP that have been stolen by the Chinese, and he's talking about intellectual property. Moving on with the headlines, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says Trump goaded China into a bad position. Indeed, he did. Bessent said that he was certain that the China was doing will affect their economy much more than ours. The story goes on to say, in the wake of the Trump announcing a 90-day pause on additional tariffs for some countries and the rise in tariffs for China, Secretary Scott Bessent said that this was Trump's plan all along as he goaded China. And the post-millennials not editing their copy. It says Sina, not China. Goaded China into a bad position. We've given 90 days. The only certainty we can provide is that the U.S. is going to negotiate in good faith. And we assume that our allies will too. And in terms of certainty, we will see what China does. He went on to say, certain that what China is doing will affect their economy much more than ours. As I said all along, that the target here in the trade war is China. And it will be allies of China. If the EU insists on retaliation with tariffs, might as well side them with the socialists. Because they are. You know, if you're not for free, unfettered trade, and when they talk about free trade, it isn't always fair trade. Free trade in one direction is not free. More headlines from One American News. Bessent applauds Trump's courage amid China tariffs. Reiterates that non-retaliating nations will be rewarded. Good. It's long. What Trump is doing is long overdue. Trump has actually been talking about this since the early 90s. Well, the story from OAN goes on to say, it took great courage for him to stay the course until this moment. Bessent said, every country in the world that wants to come and negotiate, we're willing to hear you. He then went on and specifically singled out China, which Trump is reportedly hitting with a new 125% tariff that's happened due to their insistence on escalation. So Trump predicted what the Chinese would do. So he is a good deal maker, and I'm sure he read Sun Tzu. If you haven't, you should. The Art of War. That's why he named his book The Art of the Deal, because the deal is basically a war of sorts, battle. That he knew what China was going to do. The question mark, of course, was the European Union. They're the European Union, all the countries together in Europe, pose a significant trading threat to the United States. Other countries don't. That's why all the other countries want to come and negotiate with the United States, because they have no cards. The Europe has cards, and it seems like they're going to wanted to retaliate, and he decided to, hey, I see what's coming down the pike. Let's pause this here, continue with China, and we'll see. The European Union was talking out of both sides of their mouth, saying we want to make a deal, and on the other side of their mouth, saying that they're going to retaliate. Everybody wants into the U.S. market. It's the most prolific. The velocity of cash in the United States is unprecedented. Next headline up from the Post Millennial: Amazon cancels wholesale orders of products made in China and amid trade war. The timing of the cancellations, which had no warning, led the vendors to suspect it was in response to the tariffs, which it was. New York Post: how China has amped up its factories and is threatening to crush U.S. industry with a new tsunami of cheap products. So it's called dumping on the market. When you dump in a market, it's not unusual. And that's the power that China has always had. The cheap labor, they invest and subsidize the market, the product, and then they go in and they flood the market with it. Story goes on to say $1.9 trillion tsunami is headed for American industry, and it's coming from China, the communist country with $1.3 billion people, has shifted that much cash into amping up its factories in just 4 years in an effort to overwhelm manufacturers around the world with an influx of cheap goods. And the European Union was also prepared for this and said, we're not taking your cheap products. And also with the retaliation from the Chinese, and the Chinese beginning to start using their other arrows, their other weapons in the trade war, is the European Union, Canada, and other countries are preparing to put their own tariffs to keep Chinese goods out of their country, which is interesting. The article goes on to say President Trump's 125% tariff on all Chinese imports, which he announced Wednesday as he paused steep duties on most other countries, is actually just the latest protective measure against China. The European Union, Brazil, Mexico, and Thailand have either imposed new tariffs in the past few months or are considering such measures to protect their own industries from Chinese imports. Goes on to say, over the past 4 years, China has pulled money from the housing construction and put it into building factories, with state-controlled banks granting industrial borrowers almost $2 trillion in extra financing, according to new data from China's central bank. China is building new factories nonstop and outfitting old ones with the latest tech, robots, churning out products from cars to phones to fertilizer at an unprecedented rate, all bound for foreign shores. The Times reported that China is set to overtake Germany with the world's largest car factory. Yeah, not surprised. It's BYD. So that is the electric car manufacturer, which they're flooding the world with electric vehicles, far surpassing Tesla at this point. And now they're going ahead and they're trying to put those factories where they're best needed, but they're flooding the global market with goods as a weapon in the trade war. Well, this is a belligerent act, and all trade representatives see it as that. It's also affecting Taiwan. Taiwan's president targets China influence, kicks out pro-Beijing agitators amid rising tensions. President William Lai says Taiwan won't be bullied or manipulated. Article goes on to say Taiwanese President William Lai is struggling to contain both open hostility and private wooing by China. In late March, 4 Taiwanese soldiers, 3 of them were part of a unit that provides security for Taiwan's president's office, were jailed for up to 7 years after being convicted of selling pictures of sensitive information to China. Bear with me here. I'm having a little tech problem. The verdicts came just after last month's speech in what Lei condemned the Chinese Communist Party in the harshest terms used by Taiwanese leader in modern history. In his remarks, the president said Taiwan will not be bullied or manipulated and promised repercussions against those who make expressions of loyalty to the enemy. Right? Seem to have gotten that fixed there for a second. All right, more headlines. EU countermeasures against Trump tariffs to be delayed for 90 days. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced Thursday that the countermeasures from the European Union against President Donald Trump's latest tariffs will be put on hold for 90 days as well. So they were preparing retaliatory action. We took note of the announcement by President Trump. We want to give negotiations a chance. Again, they're talking out of the both sides of their mouth. They want to negotiate, but they're preparing retaliatory tariffs. So only to bolster their leverage in negotiations, hopefully. Like I said, I'm prepared to shop American. So we are finalizing the adoption of EU countermeasures that saw strong support from our member states. We will put them on hold for 90 days. If negotiations are not satisfactory, our countermeasures will kick in. I've said it before, and all options remain on the table. So they're threatening the United States. Fuck the EU. It's a supranational organization that doesn't. The EU started as a commerce, as building the trading bloc. Okay. But it has become more than that. But it does have leverage against the United States. So I don't care. I'm ready to buy American, even if it's more. The best thing you should do now is buy things that you use, whether they're manufactured in the United States or not, because there will be, hopefully not, but there will be price hikes. But the point is to jumpstart the American economy to get it roaring again. And then people will see an improvement in their expenses versus income. I got to make that clear because not necessarily the inflated prices from the Biden administration won't come down, but your earning capacity should go up. BJ Media's reporting bombshell report exposes Biden's massive Chinese spy cover-up. Biden administration has been caught red-handed, prioritizing Beijing's feelings over American national security. In a shocking revelation, we now know that the Biden officials engaged in secret discussions with Chinese counterparts about their spy balloon before bothering to inform the American public about that our sovereignty had been violated. According to a report from Fox News, internal State Department documents revealed that on February 1st, 2023, while a Chinese surveillance balloon was floating across the nation to collecting intelligence, Biden officials were more concerned about how exposing this breach would affect our relationship with China. Seriously? The post-millennial ad or PJ Media ads. That's right. Instead of immediately shooting down this obvious threat to national security, then Secretary of State Antony Blinken and his team were busy playing diplomatic footsie with Beijing. Again, they're on the side, as many Western countries, socialists in Western countries, are on the side of the communists. Can't make this clearer. So if you have a Democrat in the White House or a Democratic administration, well, they're going to open the back door to the communist Chinese, as the Democrats did by hiring Pakistani IT workers who were connected to the ISI, who then is connected to Chinese intelligence. Blinken fretted that the public disclosure would have profound implications for our relationship with China. Of course. Reuters has a headline, U.S. 30-year mortgage rate dropped last week. Good news. The news about this, if you look at the jobs report, good. If you looked at the 30-year mortgage came down, very good. It was up at 8%. Now it's at 6.61. And they went on to say that mortgage applications increased by 20% to the highest level since September, which is outstanding. New York Post. Elon Musk's Doge discovers millions in taxpayer dollars wasted on unemployment claims for fake people. Millions of dollars in unemployment claims have been going to fake people who haven't even been born yet. Some not even in this century. Doge claimed it reviewed an initial survey of unemployment claims since 2020 that found that 9,700 people whose birth dates aren't for another 15 years have claimed $69 million in benefits. There are formation glitches and or if people fill out the forms wrong, sometimes it will lead to certain glitches, for another word, simple, erroneous birth dates. This happened in the Social Security thing too. That could explain away a certain percentage of that, but there are people that are sucking. It's a grift. They get lined up to get checks, whether unemployment or Social Security, that they're not entitled to. And that's the problem with entitlements. Any sort of entitlement program will have someone that doesn't need the entitlements, just like a leech, grasping on to the entitlement program and then sucking money out of it. Might be hackers. Who knows who it is? But without any kind of system you have, voting or otherwise, entitlement systems, they all have to, military budgets, they all have, the Federal Reserve, it all has to be audited continuously, voter rolls, because as soon as you establish a program, there are going to be ne'er-do-wells who try to leech onto it. And you have to, maybe annually or every few years, you have to go in and pick off the leeches. Excuse me. All right, Washington Post, Trump directs Justice Department to probe officials who opposed him in first term. That's the way the Washington Post puts it. But actually, Washington Times has the headline, Trump signs order directing DOJ to probe critics, Miles Taylor and Chris Krebs. The problem with Chris Krebs is, I don't know much about Miles Taylor, but Miles Taylor is the former chief of staff at the Department of Homeland Security, and Chris Krebs was Homeland cybersecurity official who's been on all the talking heads and during the 2020 election. Goes on to say it was the most, Chris Krebs said it was the most secure election ever, which it wasn't. I mean, you could just look at it. Chris Krebs is disingenuous at the least and deceitful at best, purposely. And you know he's connected to intelligence. Chris Krebs, it's not quite alliterative. Is it? I have to look. Oh, hold on. No, it's Chris Krebs. Chris with a C and then Krebs with a K. Alliterative enough for me that the guy looks smarmy, he looks like intelligence, he speaks like an intelligence person. Whether he's an asset or an agent or what, doesn't matter. He's an establishment figure that needs to be defanged at the very least. The fact is that he served in Trump's first administration. And wow. Pause and breathe. All right, post-millennial. Stay with me now. Man convicted for defacing National Gallery sculpture and climate protest stunt. The verdict sent a strong message to thousands of people who come to D.C. each year to demonstrate and be heard, said U.S. Attorney Martin. Timothy Martin. Oh, this is weird. Okay, so the U.S. attorney, it threw me for a loop there. The U.S. attorney in this story is named Martin, and the guy that is also named Martin. So Timothy Martin, 55, Raleigh, North Carolina, was found guilty by a federal jury for his role in the April 27, 2023 defacement of an art exhibit at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, according to the release by the Justice Department. The verdict was announced by U.S. Attorney Edward Martin, Jr., Special Agent in Charge, Sean Ryan of the FBI. So the guy dumped paint on a sculpture. Like I said, you want to be heard, you have a bullhorn, you could have a sign, you could stand in front of a building. That's about all you're allowed to do. Vandalism isn't free speech. Right? Speech is written or spoken. And free speech doesn't allow you to obstruct people from going about their business. I'm a free speech absolutist, but that's speech written and spoken. Not using any physical altercation. All right, the Federalist. Why is Trump DOJ hiding the FBI informant's deposition on the Oklahoma bombing? Well, we know. Nearly 30 years later, an attorney in Utah named Jesse Trendadu is still working to unearth the truth behind this ongoing Freedom of Information Act lawsuit for surveillance footage of the blast in Oklahoma City. And I think it was 92, 93. According to the FBI and Secret Service records, the footage shows McVeigh with another identified subject, which was, first they said it was Terry Nichols. And since McVeigh's other known accomplice, Terry Nichols, was confirmed to have been in Kansas on the day of the blast, John Doe number 2 his identity remains a subject of debate. Credible researchers have made the case that they have been an undercover informant or even an agent. They've made the case. I've made the case several times. We know he was being run. McVeigh was being run. Elohim City is never mentioned in the report, and it's a big part of what was going on there, is that the FBI and other intelligence was running a false flag out of Elohim City to blame the right-wingers or the conservatives there. You know, and then they come up with Timothy McVeigh, and then we know that John Doe number 2 was never ever addressed. They just said it was Terry Nichols, and then it was proven that it wasn't him, and so it didn't matter. And the fact that there was also apparently explosives in the building. I remember watching the news reports, and they had to evacuate around the scene many, many times for bombs being found in the building. Or a conspiracy, PJ Media, why the Her interview tapes are still important, why they still matter. First of all, we need to unwind the Biden administration. Everything about it. From COVID to his dropping out of the race. And now what's really on the front burner is the fact that he was, not cogent, and other people were running the government. And, well, that's not allowed in the Constitution. So he should have been removed. but they decided to keep him in. Not allowed. So those, the her interview tapes, which her works for the Department of Justice, and they were investigating the charges against the president before he was president, that he was holding on to classified documents, took classified documents, took documents he wasn't entitled to as vice president and senator, and were storing them unsecured in his garage, where the Chinese gardener was seen. No, I don't know if they have a Chinese gardener, but any Chinese agent, whether gardener or trash pickup guy or whatever, could come and look at them and photograph them. And there's been, as we know, with the surveillance balloon, the Biden administration was very cozy with China, and I believe involved in espionage, which means pay for play. I think the Chinese got their hands on sensitive information while the Biden family got rich at the same time, sort of like the Clintons. The story goes on to say an interesting development happened on Wednesday when the White House teased the possibility of releasing interview tapes from former President Joe Biden with special counsel Robert Hur. Carolyn Levitt said the American people would be quite interesting to hear that tape. And we want to see that tape because actually an audio recording was released, but it was heavily edited and it even admitted to be so. So that would be the key to unraveling Joe Biden's mental state and exactly how long he was in that state and who exactly was running the country at that time. All right, good legislative news and some not so good. Fox News is reporting Trump-backed bill to stop rogue judges passes House. Representative Darrell Issa led the Non-Rogue Rulings Act in the House. Great news. All but one Republican lawmaker voted for the bill, which passed 2019 and 2013. No Democrats voted in favor. Why would they? Because it's their operatives in the lower courts that are doing the damage. You can't have, the thing is, in federal matters concerning one of the other two branches, it's the Supreme Court's responsibility to rule there. On other federal cases in the courts, in the states, lower courts can handle that. It keeps the cases away from the Supreme Court. I don't have a problem with that. But you can't file an injunction in Missouri or whatever to stop the executive branch from carrying out their duties. All right, and some not so good news. Speaker Johnson scraps vote on budget blueprint for Trump's agenda just a day after President urges lawmakers to stop grandstanding. The problem with this is two things. As it was with the border bill, okay? Politicians lie. The truth be told is that the Senate bill isn't cutting spending. It's actually raising spending to some, from a certain point of view. That's the problem with the bill. And since MAGA is in the House, literally, they don't want to increase spending. It's unlikely that it's going to pass the House unless some of the spending is cut. See, if you knew what a senator is actually the representative of the state. It's not the representative of the voter. That's what the House is for. House representatives represent voting districts. Senators represent the state. So what does the federal government do in a budget bill? Well, it sends money to the states. So if you're an ambassador for your state, Connecticut, Montana, what have you, well, you're going to want federal dollars coming back to your state. And actually, the states require that because we send so much, a state would say, in federal taxes, we want to get some of that back. Instead of their taxes, instead of the federal tax going to the states, goes to the federal government and then back to the state. So the way the senator looks at it or the state looks at it, you're The federal government is taxing our citizens of this state. Why do you get the money and not us? But what it is pork. You know, because most of the states, like look at Minnesota or Connecticut or California, they're hemorrhaging cash. And so they need the cash to stay afloat. So, you know, do or die. House Republican leaders scrapped the plans to vote on the Senate budget blueprint Wednesday in a setback to President Trump's legislative agenda, day after the commander-in-chief urged lawmakers to close your eyes and get there. Mike Johnson huddled with hardliners for about an hour before deciding the GOP would have to punt the vote by at least one day or so lawmakers could iron out their differences. We're going to try to make this move tomorrow. This has been a very constructive process, Johnson told reporters after yanking the vote. We're going to talk about maybe going into a conference with the Senate or adding an amendment. So they're going to try to reconcile this bill. The reality here, here's my take on it, is we should pass a budget bill. Because with all the wonderful things that Trump is doing, nothing is codified. So he's doing a lot of things. A border obviously is one, but there's no border bill. It's not codified. And so we need a legislative win. And so is the win more important? And that's why Trump's pushing it. Or are the savings more important? We'll see. I think compromise is always the key in legislation. So we'll have to see. Stay with me now. More news from Just the News. Trump seeking to claw back over $100 million from New York City's migrant funds. The Trump administration is seeking to claw back $188 million in federal grants in New York City to cover migrant costs, but city leaders are vowing to challenge the move in court, of course. And if you didn't know, FEMA sent about $80 million to New York. Trump administration alleges that the money was being spent to support illegal immigration. It was indeed. FEMA's acting director Cameron Hamilton wrote in a letter that the individuals receiving these services often had no legal status or are in the United States unlawfully. And the grant program is inconsistent with the Constitution. News from Zero Hedge, largest U.S. egg producer, Cal-Maine, under DOJ price investigation. Cal-Maine Foods Incorporated, the world's largest egg producer, on Tuesday acknowledged that it is being investigated by the Department of Justice's Antitrust Division over a national increase in egg prices. The reality here is that what they did, some of the egg producers, what they did is they were actually price gouging. So what the Democrats claimed was responsible for inflated prices, which is really inflation devaluing the dollar, they kept saying that corporations were price gouging. That wasn't true. After the culling of chickens for the egg producers, some, yes, were price gouging. Were they price gouging before under the Biden administration? Who knows? But obviously that's antitrust. Because if egg producers get together and raise their prices together, that's a conspiracy, it's antitrust. BJ Media, Rubio exposes leftist agenda and corruption of U.S. aid programs. Rubio pointed out that the U.S. is no longer the world's cash cow. U.S. aid was using its finances to do a variety of nefarious things and support people that the taxpayer wouldn't support regularly, with other foreign aid. But U.S. taxpayers aren't a charity, indeed. So if you didn't know what was going on with this was money was being sent to countries and they would just take the money. You know, it was going for health programs or for nutritional programs. And the leaders of these corrupt countries like the Sudan would just take the money. Just the News is reporting Pennsylvania taking up plan to ban gender transitions for minors. The gender-related procedures at the center of this hearing are not health care and are not harmless. Indeed. Senator Judy Ward, Republican of Hollidaysburg in Pennsylvania. This hearing will give us much needed look into the real, permanent, and long-term harm that so many children are suffering because of these procedures at the hands of those who are charged to care for them. Indeed, it's the fact that gender-affirming care should affirm your gender that you were born and not the gender you think you are, because that is not care. It's an abomination to health care. That's like saying women's health care is sucking a fetus out of her womb. New York Times is reporting Americans are preparing for when all hell breaks loose. Once thought as a fringe mindset, the prepared citizen movement is gaining traction in a world shaped by war, pandemic, and extreme weather. This is where, at the beginning of COVID, I went and bought gold, and I went and got my first firearm, or went to, in Connecticut, it's a long process. So you have to take your course, you'll have to apply for your license, and then you finally get your license, and then you get approval for firearms, etc. Going back to this story, I just want to show this picture here. It shows this guy. I guess he's the trainer. And this is him as a special forces guy. Well, let's go to the story. The New York Times are saying 10 men, some wearing camouflage, others in vests loaded with ammunition for their air rifles, gathered under the morning shade of oak trees in Central Florida last month. They were there to learn marksmanship tactics common among special operations forces and elite law enforcement units. Their instructor, Christopher Eric Rocher, an Air Force veteran, introduced himself and led the group in prayer. Lord, you would use them as assets to be protectors in this world, in a world that's full of evil. They're mostly civilians, including 2 pilots, a nurse, and a construction company executive. Everybody should prepare for an environment of want. If we don't have electricity for 2 weeks, it's going to be fucking Dawn of the Dead. And I'm not being hyperbolic. That's the truth. If the system goes down, if we lose electricity, it's going to be problematic. Will food trucks still come? Will some services still be intact? Maybe. But everybody should know how to use a firearm and be prepared at least for 2 to 3 months of not having stores, not having gas, and to be able to be self-sufficient for about 3 months. Anything outside of that, anything longer than that, so you have to have food, and you have to have water, and then you have to have firearms to protect that from people who aren't prepared. And I'm not saying you shouldn't be able to share. Share is fine. But there might be people out there with firearms that want to take your food, rape your wife, take your water, take your house, take your guns. So everybody should be prepared. It's not a fringe movement. It's also good to know radio transmission. technology, at least some degree. You don't have to get your ham radio license, but you should know basically the difference in frequencies and how to use walkie-talkies and radios and so forth and so on. Have a short wave radio is also important, as well as a two-way radio. So I wanted to stick that story in there because it's not just for the doomsayer. You know, it's just everybody should be aware of how to protect yourself and protect liberty individually and within your community. I mean, you'd want to protect your community, right? Especially if it's rural or even if it's urban or suburban. Protect your street. More news from the New York Post. Trump signs executive order undoing dumb Obama-Biden showerhead regulation, which made it hard to wash his beautiful hair. Fox News, Russian ballerina, actually a Russian-American ballerina, Ksenia Karelina, released in prisoner swap with Moscow. She was sentenced to 12 years in Russian penal colony after donating about $50 to a Ukrainian charity in 2024. More from Wall Street Journal. Newsmax made defamatory statements against voting machine company Dominion. A jury must still decide on others' claims for the Newsmax 2020 election coverage and determine damages. They sued the shit out of a lot of people, including Fox News. I wouldn't have made those statements because they didn't have any definitive evidence. Although electronic voting machines, it's proven, can be hacked, but they didn't have any definitive information that they were hacked. And so you can't defame a company. You could say that voting machines aren't safe, but saying specifically that Dominion was involved in nefarious things, you can't prove that. And so they were taken to court. The funny thing about this Newsmax thing is, though, the judge made his ruling now after Newsmax went public with an IPO that was very lucrative. And an IPO is an initial public offering when they become a public company and they issue stock. One American News is reporting Trump administration fires CIA official following her previous involvement with the military's COVID-19 vaccine mandate. Terry Adirim, a former senior defense officer and top intelligence agency official who was instrumental in the Biden administration's COVID-19 vaccine mandate, was recently fired from her position. Well, good. I'm glad she was fired from her position. I think everybody who lied about the pandemic, whatever, if it was the vaccine, wasn't the vaccine, she published this meme. I guess it's a comic, a cartoon, and it shows three bears, patients needing care. Now we know who's been sleeping in our beds, and it has three people that have been intubated, and they're all listed as unvaccinated, as you can see here. That's a lie. That cartoon was a lie. If she believed that, she's stupid. First of all, intubation was exactly the wrong thing to do for some of these patients. And I believe it goes on to say, yeah, here it is. It has been assumed that the COVID-19 vaccination reduces the risk of transmission to others. Results during the Delta predominance show that the viral load in the vaccinated population is not consistently lower compared to the unvaccinated. And during the Omicron predominance, the viral load was even somewhat higher in the vaccinated, as we often said. And that's according to the National Library of Medicine. Public health data from the UK show that the number of COVID-19 cases is higher among fully vaccinated and boosted populations. It continued. I don't want to belabor COVID anymore because if you don't know, now you know. Zero Hedges reporting leaked China CDC document confirms new H5N1 strain more contagious to humans. Internal notice by the Chinese National Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the China's CDC, issued in March and obtained the Epoch Times, a warning of increased human contagion with new mutant strain, highly pathogenic avian influenza. That's bad. China is probably preparing, like I said, they consider themselves at war with us, so they're probably preparing some very deadly weaponry. And now, it won't be COVID, it's going to be a bird flu. The internal document titled National Center of Disease Control and Prevention reports the dynamics of H5N1 variants and analysis of response measures taken by primary and secondary schools in Beijing and Shanghai. Tentatively named H5N1 2025. Oh, just like COVID-19. It's got a date on there. As a new mutation in the hemoglobin protein gene. Irrelevant. Just like, the thing with COVID-19 now, because I think I had it in October or November of 2019, strangely, I met with some old friends who had a new friend, and he worked for a biomedical research facility. Not joking. But it was found out that people back in the fall of 2019 in this country already had COVID. And we surmised this way back in February of 2020. There were people all over the radio saying, hey, I think I had COVID already last year. Speaking of IPOs, the hottest pre-IPO stock, an AI robotic startup with bold claims. Founder says Figure AI has created autonomous robots, setting off an investor frenzy in private markets. I said this already ad nauseum over the past 6 months. The humanoid robots are online, are already being produced in mass, and by mid to late next year, they'll start introducing them to households as a novelty. They're supposed to be like 30 grand a piece. And, just like the people, I see people, there's a guy in the street over from me who's got one of those robot lawnmowers that like goes around the lawn by itself. And he's got 2 Teslas and a whatever. But this is going to happen. So as I mentioned previously, that it's going to happen. Because they're looking to displace human labor. I don't think that should be the case. I'm not fearful of technology, but I'm fearful of their plans of technology. For all of us. And for younger generations and stuff that haven't even been in the workforce long, they're going to be pushed out. What are we going to do with all these people? H5N1 2025. All right, thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment. I went a little over today. We had to go through about 40 news stories. So thanks for sticking with me. I appreciate you all. Don't forget to engage the channel. Join me every day, Monday through Friday, live, 10 a.m. on Rumble. Check out my other website, libpop.org. Learn about libertarian populism. Stay hip to the trick. And I'll see you tomorrow. Respect.
This is a conspiracy.
The New World Order.
I kill you! I kill you! I kill you!